Welcome back to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. It's USC Primetime Live, presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Crash Collier, joined by my co-host, Ethan Inman. How are you doing tonight, Ethan?
I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well as well, Crash.
Same, about to go on the road for my job, leave for Jacksonville in the morning. So excited, though, to talk some USC football and also just some college football in general. Just, great to talk sports here on the channel. So, Ethan, last week, and we kind of talked a little bit about leading up to it, you brought an interesting article to my attention that I'm going to put up on the screen now for our listeners. It was this article by Stuart Mandel's in The Athletic, his top 25 coach rankings of 2026. That I won't go through all of them, but the top five were Kurt Cignetti, Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, and Kalen DeBoer were the top five for that. So those are pretty much the ones that are, popping up. So just kind of wanted, Ethan, especially since you brought this one to our attention, I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like the top five are super surprising. I mean, it's all guys who have really kind of dominated the space. I think, the thing that stood out to me as being the most surprising is no Lincoln Riley at all. He's nowhere to be found on the top 25, the Athletics list of the top 25 coaches in college football. I mean, yeah, you can scroll through all 25 names, you won't find him there. Which, is and he's not even in the just missed either. I mean, you have
he wasn't in it last. He wasn't even in it last year too, considering you have the dropped outs as well.
Yeah, you have Bob Chesney in there when he hasn't coached a single game at UCLA yet. You have the coach at Navy, and you have Sonny Dykes, who just beat Lincoln Riley in the Alamo Bowl, and you have no Lincoln Riley. And I mean, I have my opinions about this both ways. Like, on one hand, do I think Lincoln Riley should be in here, or at least in the conversation? I do. I mean, I don't think that that's a USC fan bias. I think when you watch USC games, regardless of your fandom, you can still acknowledge Lincoln Riley's talent. He accomplished a lot at a very young age. He, is still one of the best offensive minds in all of football. So I think that they're underrating him a little bit. But I think the fact that, the average person could go through this article and, not see Lincoln Riley's name and not be completely shocked and outraged. The fact that it's even a conversation that he's not even there is a little alarming. So that's kind of like what caught my attention about that one there. But Crash, I'm curious to hear kind of your thoughts on, that premise that I just brought up there, if that makes sense.
I think if you're looking at it career-wise, he's been a head coach for 9 years now, 5 at Oklahoma, which were obviously very accomplished. 4 at USC, have not quite lived up to that standard expected of a program like USC, or even a program of Oklahoma's caliber, which is also a blue blood, very high regarded, obviously very much in very high standing in the college football world. However, I do believe I read, if I missed it correctly, apologies if that goes black for a sec because I'm scrolling. I think if I read the criteria left, it's basically, Bruce Feldman says, a quick reminder, these rankings are not a career achievement award. They are a snapshot of the coaching landscape today. While I don't throw out a coach's earlier accomplishments, I'm more concerned with their trajectory over the past 3 to 5 seasons. So obviously then that does encapture Riley's last season at Oklahoma and his first at USC. But in general, if you look at the last 3 years of his trajectory, hard to say it's lived up. I mean, yes, the 9-win season last year was great, but the 2 in between definitely are a bit of a stain on it. And that's kind of why I'm not surprised. It's alarming, but I'm not surprised that he's not on this list, which, like you said, is very alarming for USC fans, especially with the money that USC shelled out to get him from Norman to Los Angeles. So those are kind of my thoughts on it. But I do want to scroll now back to the bottom of the list again. And a name you mentioned is one that obviously I think a lot of people have been talking about ever since he got hired, was UCLA's Bob Chesney, who's clearly on there for his accomplishments during his 2 years at James Madison, as well as all his stops prior to his run with the Dukes that ultimately culminated with that college football playoff berth last season. So is Bob Chesney on there also cause for alarm for USC fans? I guess is the question that I want to ask you next.
Yeah, I mean, I don't I don't think so. I think like UCLA just program wide is kind of a mess, and not in a good place right now with like Martin Jarmond and everybody else that's in charge. So I would hesitate to say that, I think Bob Chesney is going to step in and immediately put up like a Kurt Signetti performance, basically. Um, I think it's people overrating him a little bit, because of Signetti and putting a little bit too much stock in him a little too quickly, if that makes sense. I think Yeah, I think though you made a good point about money, because Lincoln Riley, nowhere to be found on this list, but where he is very prominently to be found is the list of top 25 highest paid college football playoff coaches or college football coaches, um, in which he is number three, behind only Kirby Smart and Ryan Day, who
I think
obviously
Kurt
have
Signetti, Kurt
accomplished.
Signetti too now as well. So
Yes,
I think
Kurt
he might be
Signetti too. Now this
he might
this
be
is
four. I think he's four.
yes, this is an older article.
Fair enough.
Um, from October 2025. So that's my bad, guys. But yeah, that's he's regardless. He's certainly near the top of that list. And that's kind of when USC paid him that money, they expected him to put up that performance, right? They expected him to. I mean, at the time, he was certainly one of the top five coaches in the country. They expected him to put up a top five coaching performance in the country, and so they paid him top five money. Um, and he had to leave a very comfortable situation to come out to LA and all that kind of stuff. Um, and you can't pin it all entirely on Lincoln Riley. Obviously, like the program, USC's had its share of program wide issues. Um, and there's been lots of turnover, kind of around the program and not just at the coaching level and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's certainly not a great. It, you know, it just kind of adds to the frustration and reminds USC fans, I think, like that the first handful of years under Lincoln Riley have been a disappointment, and that more is kind of needed out of him going forward. So yeah, that's. I mean, I I'm still high on Lincoln Riley, and I've tried to kind of hold that out as long as I can. Matt's someone who's a lot more critical, and we obviously still miss Matt this week. Um, but and so we've kind of gone back and forth on Lincoln Riley in past weeks, but I think kind of regardless of if you're still high on him, if you still have hope for him, or if you're kind of more down on him, more critical of him, both sides can acknowledge that they would like to see more out of him. Um, whether you believe he can do it or not, I guess, if that makes sense. That's more the question. It's not has Lincoln Riley's years at USC been a success? It's more, do you think he can get to the point where he can have success? So, yeah, that's
And I
kind of where
think
we're
it's
at.
and I think it's a question that he has exactly that he's got 1 year to answer if he wants to keep his job. I think as we've discussed, 9-3, and it's got to be a respectable 9-3, as in you just missed the playoffs. 8-4, kind of a gray area. At least I see it. You can totally disagree if you see it a little different. 7-5, I think we both agree that's probably it for him here if that's how it goes next year. So really, I think you look at this list, you see him not on there. Wasn't even in it last year. He's not even a just miss, so essentially an honorable mention. But seeing Bob Chesney, and obviously, yes, Chesney has not yet coached a game for the Bruins, but I think it's alarming when it's just obviously the guy's had success everywhere he's been. You can't deny that. And especially you could say, oh, yeah, but he took over. Signetti had the program in good health. Maybe got a couple guys, but keep in mind the number of guys that Signetti took with him to Indiana that ultimately got to raise that national championship trophy a couple months back. So he did have to, kind of, sort of start over a little bit at James Madison So I think that he's on there. I think it's just alarming in terms of what he's done. Obviously, he's come in very confident, and I think it'll definitely be interesting to see him on the other sideline this year when USC plays UCLA. I think, like you said, there's been a lot of hype. I've seen some of the videos, and I think he's smart about how he goes about it, but he has that confidence that I think gets a lot of people excited. I think I saw a Max Brown video where he, as a former USC quarterback, he's a little alarmed because of just how Chesney's wired. It's like all the guy wants to do is just, coach and build programs. So I think that's kind of like, what? I believe Max Brown called him a psycho, and he was like, as a former Trojan, I'm a little alarmed. So I think there is a lot of hype there. I'm not saying it's all unwarranted, but I think when he makes it and Riley does, and I think there's certainly something that's definitely alarming. And I think you brought up the money, Ethan, or we talked about it. And when you're obviously a top 5 paid college football coach, people are going to expect a lot out of you. I just think even of conversations I've had when you make a small mistake and someone just reminds you you're getting paid a lot of money, and just I'm talking like just hourly wage in my case. I'm not getting too specific into the example of it, but pretty much someone's just like, you're getting paid a lot of money, deliver on that and do your job correctly. Don't make careless mistakes. And I'm not saying that Lincoln Riley's being careless, but all I'm trying to say is with money comes expectations. So I think just seeing that he's not on this list, but he's high up on salary is definitely something that I think it's obviously going to be a really big year for him. Ethan, is there any other final thoughts you want to kind of add to this article or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any article like this, it, can do one of two things. It can, and we've kind of covered mostly one side of it when, in our discussion of this article, is it can alarm you, whether you're the subject that missed, Lincoln, the subject being Lincoln Riley, whether you're the subject that missed, the cut in the article, whether you're the players on his team, whether you're, in some way affiliated with the program, whether you're a fan, whatever. And we've touched on why that could be alarming, and that's, you can let it get you down. Basically, you can let the fact that it is somewhat alarming just like kind of lower your expectations, and just I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but yeah, just make you, I guess, less optimistic for the season, I suppose. Or you can use it as bulletin board material. And I think that's, the kind of challenge for Lincoln Riley for this USC football program is to take articles like this. If they're paying any attention to them, which I think in the modern age you kind of can't avoid the noise. It's really, really difficult to, at least. And so I think, assuming that the noise is finding them, you have to use this stuff as bulletin board material. You have to, pin that up in your office and say, I'm going to make this list look silly. I'm going to make this very respected college football writer look very silly. And so that's what we should be hoping for, obviously, is for Lincoln Riley to just prove everybody wrong, including the New York Times, The Athletic, all 25 of the other college football coaches that are on the list, all that kind of stuff. So here's to hoping that's what we see this season for sure.
I can think of exactly one football coach who probably could tune out anything negative about him. Say what you want about him. I don't care that he was the coach at UCLA for 6 years. Chip Kelly. That guy just is never on his phone. If that guy is not scheming up offenses on the field, he is in his office watching film. I think that guy's just like, you got to give Chip credit for that, for whatever you think of him as a coach. Obviously, he's was previously at UCLA and Oregon, which I know are, places that Trojan fans don't really like or don't like, except I think I'm the lone exception on Oregon because of my aunt, so I have a soft spot for them. Please don't kill me, Trojan family. But yeah, so I think Chip Kelly's like the one guy who could probably avoid all that noise and just, do his thing with offense. Ethan, I did want to ask you also, were there any other just surprises in general on that list as you were browsing it, of anything that, caught any coaches that caught your eye that were kind of, shockers on that 25?
I think I was like pretty focused on the Lincoln Riley angle. I mean, Brett Bielema still being there at 25 is kind of interesting. You know, maybe if that USC Illinois game. I mean, there's so many what ifs to that USC Illinois game, right? In terms of like USC making the playoff and a whole host of other angles. But you know, add this to the list. Like maybe if USC beats Illinois in that game, you know, we're talking about Lincoln Riley at number 25 and not Brett Bielema. But you know, I don't know. It was Bob Chesney. I mean, we already talked about him. Like, hasn't coached a game at the Power Five level, but you know, is more trustworthy at this point than Lincoln Riley to the media. So I don't know. It's those were kind of the two, but yeah, I was pretty focused on the Lincoln Riley one because I think as a USC fan, that's the most glaring and obvious issue with the list for sure.
I think the one that caught my eye the most of kind of shocking was Dabo Swinney at number 19. He was number 6 in 2025. I think Mandel does a good analysis of why he thinks that they were why he kept him on there, but at the same time, you look at just he's kind of just been been a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, give Dabo credit for finally adapting to the transfer portal, but still, this first year was ultimately 7-6. Now, could it be better? We'll see. I mean, I'm glad he's starting to adjust to it. I mean, he's had some comments in the past I haven't liked about players being compensated in general. So I'm glad he's finally starting to just realize that, all right, I can either adapt to the times or get fired at some point. We'll see when Clemson, if, you know. But I think just with the way that season ended, I'm just surprised that he even clocked in where he did on this list. But we'll see that happens. I mean, definitely interesting. Definitely be interesting to follow them for sure. So that was kind of one that I caught my eye as I was reading it. Because when you sent it to me, I ended up just reading the whole thing and just really wanted to just kind of get a glance of like, all right, where does Mandel think everybody stands in the current at the moment, even regardless of where they've been or where they coached or what they think could translate. Because some of those names, obviously, like Bob Chesney, are on there because of what people think the translation will be from James Madison to UCLA.
Yeah, speaking of Clemson, this is like kind of off topic, but did you see and this was also a while ago, but did you see that whole thing that went down with Luke Ferrelli where he accused Pete Golding of tampering? I thought that was like a really interesting press conference. Like, I don't know if you have seen the video in full, but like the way that Dabo Sweeney kind of kept receipts on that whole situation is like truly fascinating to me. Like, it seemed like he knew like every detail moment by moment of Luke Ferrelli's like contact with both Clemson and Ole Miss, and I don't know. That was an interesting saga, and I guess it's technically not over yet, but very very weird. And I think also it was like the reason I thought of it and thinking about Dabo Sweeney is like um, Luke Ferrelli like is I guess sort of a like figurehead for this whole all these issues with tampering and transferring and all that kind of stuff. Um, but he also is like I think like a 3-star transfer prospect. Like he's not like someone who's going to win or lose Clemson the national championship or Ole Miss. At least you wouldn't think so. So the I don't know. That was just kind of an interesting saga. I was curious if you saw that one.
I haven't seen the video. I saw like the quotes about it and all, and like everything going down. The big thing I just remember is Golding saying, "All right, what's your buyout?" Or that might have been another player, but I can't remember exactly all the details. But basically, what seems like some of these instances with Ole Miss picking up. Oh yeah, I think it was what the guy who was at Cal was going to go to
Yeah.
Clemson, then flipped, right?
Yeah. Well,
Golding was just like,
he'd already like signed at Clemson, was like practicing with Clemson.
and then Golding reaches out. It's like, "What's your buyout?" And Golding's basically kind of, could you say, is maybe taking in a bit of Lane Kiffin. Maybe did, bit of Lane Kiffin, I guess, maybe stood behind in Oxford and is still living in Pete Golding. But it was pretty much like, okay, what's your buyout? Great. Here's what we're offering you. And basically what told Clemson to kick rocks was pretty much the details of it. So it seemed like Golding must have seen something in him to be, 1, buy him out, 2, offer him more money, and then 3, go tell Clemson to kick rocks.
Yeah, it was truly, truly interesting. But anyway, we
For,
should get back on topic to USC for sure.
for sure, yeah. And we definitely will talk more about USC, but first, our FanDuel segment. And today we will be talking about March Madness, USC women's basketball, making it as a 9 seed. They'll be in the Sacramento 4 region, and they head down to Columbia where they'll take on Clemson in the opening round. And if they win and barring a massive upset to number one South Carolina, the Trojans have a rematch with the Gamecocks. But our focus today is, and in some ways, I guess we are staying on topic a little bit with Clemson here, Ethan, is USC will face the Tigers in the opening round, and they're 5.5-point favorites. And money line is negative 230 for USC, plus 184 for Clemson, over under at 121.5. And then the spread is juiced for the Trojans. So, what are your thoughts on these odds, Ethan?
They're interesting. I think I feel good about USC, but it's just more of like a gut trusting Lindsey Gottlieb feeling. Like I just don't think I don't expect USC to go out on a 5-game losing streak. Like this is not the kind of program that Lindsey Gottlieb has built where like the season just kind of falls apart at the end and there's nothing to really be proud of or build on. I guarantee she's been working them hard in practice ever since that Washington loss and has been preparing them for this moment and has not like allowed them to be satisfied with just kind of squandering the end of the season. She wants to compete. And I'm sure she wants a rematch with South Carolina, and she wants to kind of try to test the Gamecocks again after the way the early season matchup in Crypto.com Arena went. So I have that gut feeling. I just don't feel like the recent results would suggest that USC should be such a favorite. I mean, they are the lower seed, and they are on a 4-game losing streak, and that kind of thing. And they did lose to Penn State not that long ago, which the Nittany Lions are hardly a Big Ten powerhouse, if that makes sense. But so yeah, it's interesting. It seems like while I would bet on USC to win outright, I don't really feel confident in them winning by 6 points or more, if that makes sense. Like I would definitely stay away from the spread in general. The over under I would Oh, it's kind of just a weird one too. I feel like I'd also stay away from that. I'd just stay away from betting on this game in general because I feel like again, my gut instinct goes to it's like a low scoring, hard fought game, but 122 points is not a lot. Like that's like a 62-60 final score. So I don't, but I'm not. While I think the points will be over that, I'm not like supremely confident that it will either because, like I said, I do expect it to be low scoring and hard fought. So um, I don't know. It's just like a weird. I don't see any obvious betting angles for this one.
For sure. I think definitely make some good points there. And especially while Clemson will be playing on one of their biggest rivals' home courts, they will still have the home court advantage, at least against USC, considering Clemson's about 2.5 hours, I was reading, from South Carolina. So it's going to be a lot easier for Tigers fans to get to Columbia than it is for Trojan fans. So I think for that reason, I'm surprised about that. But then one thing Ryan Karchi brought to my attention in his Times of Troy letter this morning was that Kara Dunn has a lot of experience against the Tigers from her time at Georgia Tech. And I think she was 4-0, if I read that correctly. So she has some experience against them from her time in the ACC. So USC definitely needs to lean on her. I still feel like, though, it's going to be a closer game, especially when you factor in that while definitely I think, yeah, USC, it's hard to see them ending the year on 5 in a row. Even like I thought maybe they had a fighting chance to, maybe beat Washington and, after just the way, the regular season ended. But I think at the same time, USC then still, I think they got a chance. And at the same time, making March Madness, I think definitely can do something that really motivates you. I've talked to a couple other coaches about it on USC's campus when their teams made the postseason, even after ending the season on a tough 3 or 4 game skid. And it's just, they're just like, how do you not get motivated is pretty much what they ask, is what their response is when I ask them, how do you motivate even after this tough ending to the regular season? So I think, yeah, it's definitely an interesting game for sure, especially with Clemson having the home court advantage, yet it's on their rivals' turf, and USC just being in this interesting spot that's been kind of weird to see. Even like before Juju Watkins got there, it seemed like they didn't, I don't recall them having a 4-game losing streak, at least not in Lindsey Gottlieb's second year. And then obviously it was non-existent in the last 2 years prior to this year. So really interesting game for sure. But any other things you're obviously looking forward to, especially if, USC does earn that rematch against South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see. I think whenever USC plays a top team, I'm really interested to see how Jazzy Davidson plays, because I think, the kind of rule of thumb throughout the season has been if Jazzy Davidson plays well against a top team, USC has like a fighting chance. And if Jazzy Davidson, gets shut down, and turns the ball over a lot and, just can't get her shot going, then, USC is kind of doesn't really have as much of a chance. So it's kind of been a USC goes as she goes in those games. Like, had kind of her coming out party against NC State early in the season, and then followed it up with kind of a tougher performance against South Carolina. So I'm just interested to see how she would do against Dawn Staley, and the kind of that defense, and just like all the veterans on that team. Just I think that'd be a real kind of benchmark of her growth this season for sure. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing. Like you said, like Cara Dunn against Clemson is really like an interesting matchup. I think it gives her a chance to kind of, you know, tie a nice bow around her career if she like puts up another really great performance, and just kind of like hammer home just kind of the great season that she turned out to have. Because kind of at the beginning of the year she was, not being as aggressive and as assertive on the offensive end, but then she really kind of carried USC through a lot of Big Ten play. When USC was winning those Big Ten games. So, there's a real opportunity for a lot of these players to, elevate their standing in terms of, where, the pro teams see them, or, kind of how Lindsey Gottlieb thinks that they factor into next year's plans. Because obviously next year you got Juju coming back, you got Sanaya Hall, you got Sataya Fagan, like you got a ton of talent. And so finding a spot in this rotation and finding the basketball in general is going to be pretty hard to come by. Like, good luck getting on the court, first of all. And then second of all, when you do get on the court, good luck getting the basketball. So if you want to be kind of trusted by Lindsey Gottlieb next year, putting up a good result in these playoff games is going to be really important. So that's kind of what I'm looking for there. But yeah, it's always fun to play South Carolina. So I hope that USC makes it there. These are some of the most famous and well-beloved college women's basketball players in the country. So anytime you can kind of be on that stage and go toe-to-toe with, an incredible coach like Dawn Staley in that program, it's always a real fun time. So yeah, hoping USC can put up a little better result this time, but compared to how the game in crypto went, especially, kind of South Carolina wins on USC's home floor. If USC can kind of get, some semblance of revenge on South Carolina's home floor, that would certainly be sweet. So not USC's home floor, but in USC's home city. But yeah.
It'll also be interesting too, especially with USC set to face the Gamecocks again on November 15th, I think in Greensboro, South Carolina. So finishing the other end of that home and home to the extent that it is, while technically both neutral site games. Be interesting to see that one. Also, so if USC can get another rematch, kind of give us a gauge of where the team's at prior to the addition of Juju and the two freshmen and everyone else who's going to be coming in next year. And also excited to see USC go up against former coach Wendell Farrow, who's now on the Gamecocks coaching staff under Staley. So definitely would be cool to see USC get to play against him again. Definitely one of the coaches you really love him because you can just tell how much he cares about his players. Like that just came across so much I miss him so much. So Dale, if you're watching this, hope that you're doing well. We miss you so much at the real USC, by the way, and hope you come back. Hope you make it back here one day. Hope you want to come back. I hope hope there's a spot for you. I can't promise anything, but would love to have you back on the staff if you decide you want to be back in LA. So had to throw that out there. Just I'll never forget when he just came over once and thanked me for coming like my freshman year, and that was my introduction to him. Like he gave me a T-shirt, so just had to show the man some love, even though he's with the wrong SC now. Anyways, Ethan, I think it's time we move back into football, and wanted to ask you about a couple of things. USC, I think, got a big recruit over the weekend or last week with Honor Fa'alave Johnson choosing to sign with the Trojans over Oregon, Miami, Texas, LSU, and Notre Dame. And it's a huge win for obviously for Lincoln Riley getting for the first time since Damani Jackson 2022, USC getting the top California prospect. So what are your thoughts on just how he could be used, especially how he could be used for the Trojans, especially given that he's at least in high school playing both safety and running back?
Yeah, I mean, we're just now one season removed from Travis Hunter winning the Heisman, playing both sides of the football. And, kind of Travis Hunter doing what he did, I think is going to make a lot of these younger players like Fa'alave Johnson believe that they too can kind of be the next Travis Hunter. And, we're kind of, I think, still waiting to see a little bit if it's going to work out in the NFL for Travis Hunter, with kind of his injury plagued first season over there in Jacksonville. And he was really only playing receiver before that as well. But you have to remember, like, going to another sport, Shohei Ohtani with Ohtani was kind of the same thing. Like Ohtani doing both kind of made other players believe that they can do both. And we've yet to see really another Ohtani. We've seen a lot of players try to do it in the minor leagues and then kind of, end up being shoehorned into one position or the other. But I think that you're going to see more players kind of continue to try to do it. And I think you're eventually going to see a few more of them succeed. Some guys like Jack Caglione and others will get shoehorned into, one position, but I think some of the guys are going to make it. So, because again, teams are also just more willing to try it. Like, who doesn't want the next Ohtani? So anyway, I think, kind of moving back from baseball to football again, I just think that like Travis Hunter doing it at such a high level, being one of the best corners and one of the best receivers in all of college football, and doing both at the same time is going to make like more teams willing to try it, more players willing to try it. So that will kind of be one of the big questions, I think, is will USC let Fa'alave Johnson play both sides of the football? Is that something that Fa'alave Johnson will want to do? So it's something to kind of just keep monitoring for sure. But yeah, you also mentioned like him being the best college, or him being the kind of number one recruit in all of California is super big, and USC really should be landing the number one recruit in all of California. I mean, I think a lot of USC fans feel that way. I mean, Stanford's not a powerhouse anymore. Cal is still kind of middling. UCLA has a whole range of issues, and so there's not really any program in California that should be competing with USC. And USC beat out a lot of rivals too to kind of win his commitment. I mean, picked USC over Oregon, picked USC over Notre Dame. So anytime you can kind of beat your rivals out and make yourself look like a more enticing place to come play football than your rivals, that's definitely a win. So USC obviously likes to see Oregon lose recruiting battles almost as much as they like to see the Trojans win them. And so when you can do both at the same time, that's definitely exciting. USC kind of definitely has like a headliner for their 2027 class now. We're kind of still waiting for that to shape up. We're waiting to see if, USC will be in the conversation for having that number one class in the country like they were in 2026. But now they have kind Um, yeah, I don't know. Those are kind of just like my tentative thoughts, but I'm sure you have plenty yourself, Crash. So I'll let you jump in there for sure.
Well, I think Ethan, you made a great point about just USC needs to be winning those recruiting battles, especially in their own backyard. And I think that's something, I think that's a testament to the work of Chad Bowden, him really wanting to really fence off California, especially Southern California, off from the rest of the college football world. I think he's done a terrific job of it and really, really build it, like I've talked about before, just really building up relationships with all the high school powerhouses in the area, especially that are like in proximity to USC, and really, especially fending off Oregon too. It was like who's especially with Dan Lanning just being such a regular at places like Mater Dei, for example. And I think also just you talk about could it work there? I mean, I'm wondering though, an example that as you were talking about Otani, I'm gonna go to baseball a little bit for this one that I'm thinking of just at least some of those at least top college programs that, yeah, maybe it's cool to try it, but are they gonna, really are they really gonna kind of push you into one or the other? Like the example that comes to mind for me baseball wise is Paul Skeens. Dude was dominating. Dude was like just totally raking at Air Force, both offensively and on the mound. But then after 2 years at Air Force, he transfers to LSU, and Jay Johnson, the coaching staff there, is just like, dude, you're pitching every day. I mean, ultimately worked out, and he turned out to be the number one pitcher, got to the majors in less than a year, and look at him now. Could help Team USA win the World Baseball Classic, and has been a big part of that run. But I think when you just look at a player like that, it's just even when he got to maybe right now just currently the best program, like currently speaking in college baseball in LSU, just with their dominance, 2 national championships in the last 3 seasons. And even there, they're just like, nah, man, sorry, like you're pitching. So I'm not saying it won't happen with Johnson, but at the same time, I'm wondering if a program like USC in football, just coming back there, is going to be like, hey, man, like we know you're good at both these, but we're going to need you in, we're going to need you maybe just safety. Like we're a little thin there, or you know what, we need an extra running back. Assuming, USC gets their secondary in order. And they're like, hey, we just need more depth at running back now. So I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'm just one. And I hope he gets the opportunity to play both, because I'd love to see more two-way guys, even if, it's not working out in the NFL. And that's, I guess, another example, even Travis Hunter. Obviously, Colorado's not quite at the level of some of programs like USC. And obviously, with him being kind of one of Deion Sanders' boys, he kind of got a bit more leeway to do that, at least the way I see it. So, and obviously, I'm not saying he can't pull it off in the NFL. It's definitely been tricky with all the injuries he's been dealing with. So is that just going to be a concern there if you're just playing so much, exhausting yourself even more? Is that going to just lead to more injury and fatigue, especially at a program like USC in a conference now, by the way, that's just much more physically demanding with just the brutality of the Big Ten, not just from the travel, but even just the games on the field. So I did just want to bring that up. Say I hope he gets a chance, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he is moved into one or the other based on kind of USC's needs and where they kind of see him excel more. So those are kind of my thoughts on it.
See, I think that another really interesting wrinkle to this conversation, though, is every indication, so far seems to be that USC is willing to try him out at both positions, and also that he wants to play both positions. And, in the current era, and so the wrinkle is in the current era of the transfer portal, like you have to work a lot harder to keep your players happy, and there's a lot more, quicker and more decisive consequences if you don't. Like the player can just leave after 1 year and immediately play somewhere else. And in fact, we've seen examples of players just quitting on their teams midseason, cough, cough, Bear Alexander, because they didn't, utilize them in the way they wanted to. And so it makes me wonder, like maybe USC was able to get Falave Johnson because they promised him that they'd play him at both positions. And then if USC goes back on that, like, are they just kind of dooming themselves of keeping him around and he's just going to go somewhere else where he can play both positions? Because, like, I mean, he's going to find a place somewhere in, the prominent college football world that's going to allow him to play both. It may not be, if it turns out that USC has a pretty competitive roster these next couple years with all the top recruits they've been getting, and there's not really room on the field to play him at both, and they try to kind of shoehorn him into one. Like there's going to be like lower level Division I teams that will let him do both. Like some of these like lesser ACC teams, or like Big 12 teams, like somebody out there is going to let him play both at the Division I level for sure. So like, and so if USC is not letting him do so, like they're just going to immediately come calling and be like, we will, and we'll also pay you a ton of money because you're one of the best, one of the most talented athletes in the country, one of the fastest players in his class, like all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's USC may have its hands tied in terms of like needing to try him at both positions. Not that like, he like forced USC to like give him an offer or anything. Like USC obviously very highly like holds him in very high regard and very aggressively pursued bringing him to LA. But I think that's definitely something to watch. Like I think it seems like it's really important to him to be able to try out both positions, and I don't think USC would have been able to land his commitment if there was kind of any doubt in his mind that they would let him kind of pursue that dream, if that makes sense.
It for sure does. And I mean, I think you could see it even just, I could see him even going to some programs that have just, recently caught kind of fire, and just obviously it put places like Indiana, Vanderbilt, places that you don't think of as historically good, that are just going to be like, hey, all right, come to me. We'll let you play. I could think of a bunch of programs, even the SEC Big Ten, especially mentioned like ACC's wide open. I could totally see, places like Virginia, Virginia Tech, who, think like they could, catch fire. And I think those could be intriguing programs. Maybe I'm mentioning those two because, I'm now in Virginia. And so I'm kind of, sort of, learning a bit about just the college
You and
world out
James
here.
Franklin are both in Virginia now, so
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, even I went to a UVA Virginia Tech game a couple weeks ago. Happened to see a former Trojan Malik Thomas play, actually. So
there you go.
that was kind of cool to see. But so small world. But anyways, it'll definitely be interesting to see like what happens with it. So I'm really fascinated on how USC goes about this. So I think they'll let him try it, but all I'm just saying is don't be surprised if it doesn't, especially for, when you just look at athletes who, have been, kind of forced one way or the other, whether it's offense or defense, football, pitching, hitting, baseball, any other of those sports where they kind of, really make you pick a lane. They're not just like, it's one or the other. We're not letting you do one and the other.
This is kind of making me miss the spring game even more, because I feel like what an intriguing spring game if you can see your kind of shiny new prospect play both sides of the football. That would be kind of one of the most interesting things about potential 2028 spring game.
Oh, for
But
sure.
yeah,
Especially our conversation last week, Ethan, where we both talked about our new jobs, where we talked about how part of it is like engaging fans, getting people,
yep.
Excited about it, and how we both argued that the spring game is such a way to do that, bring fans together, especially ones who may not be able to who might not always have the means to attend like even one game, or maybe, or really, having to figure it out, especially when you account for all the other expenses that go into it, not just the ticket into the stadium.
Yep.
So yeah.
Oh well, maybe they'll bring the spring game back by then. I doubt it, but you never know, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see. I think definitely it could be a lot interesting. It's definitely gonna be interesting the way things go. I mean, I think Florida State seemed like they were gonna bring it back this year, but then what? It just kind of just didn't happen, and they didn't really give a reason. I don't know if you saw that headline the other day. And then
No, I didn't. But that
it just popped up in my Google feed, so I'm not remembering all of it. So don't directly quote me on this, but I think it was saying, "Oh, Florida State was hoping to bring it back, but then it just didn't happen because ... And then that was kind of the headline. That was kind of all I got. So definitely interesting to that'll be another interesting development to follow as well. I mean, obviously we talked a lot about it last week. Not sure we exactly need to, rehash it this week, but I think it's definitely going to be an interesting trend to follow. Like, what do schools do? Where do they realize? Especially, does the transfer portal deadline move? I know the Big Ten prefers in the spring. Everyone else wants it right after the right where it is now. So, be interesting to follow all those developments. Ethan, I do now want to turn to USC's Pro Day, which happened last week. What were kind of your thoughts from that, and just what stood out to you from that, and especially the fact that representatives from all 32 NFL teams were in attendance?
Yeah, I mean, that's always great to hear. I mean, a lot of NFL interest in some of these USC prospects. I kind of wanted to highlight an article from Micah Huff over at Trojans Wire, which I am still technically affiliated with. I have my article output recently has been a little low just because I've been really focused on my new full-time job. But I obviously still love Trojans Wire, still love the work that Micah and Adam are doing over there, and always want to promote, them and especially given our ties here with Matt at this podcast and stuff like that. So I'm gonna pull up Micah's article. He kind of just talked about Makai Lemon's 40-yard dash, um, and so Field Yates was kind of commenting on Makai Lemon's 40-yard dash, which it's always kind of great when you can catch the attention of such a prominent NFL analyst like Field Yates is. 4.46, but so pretty solid. But he also, Field Yates is obviously aware of Makai Lemon's other skills as well. So yeah, sounds like he, you know, not necessarily blew people away with that 40 time, but kind of did put up a good enough performance there that, and generally given kind of his other tape and all that kind of stuff, impressed. So that's good to hear. Obviously, it's good to hear that he's continuing to get positive attention ahead of the draft. And yeah, so that was kind of what I saw there. But I'm sure you have plenty of other takeaways that we can talk about.
For sure. I think it was also interesting with Makai Lemon, kind of continue on him. I really, thought Sam Farmer had an interesting article about how just obviously USC, or Makai Lemon, showed off his stuff. But then when they were talking about at the combine, when he was, kind of interviewing, he was just, sort of, I didn't hear the whole thing, but it just seemed like he was sort of just himself, maybe a little like confident, maybe a little unapologetic. It seemed like they're just like, we love that he was just kind of his authentic self. So I think that just shows that obviously, I think he did great like at the pro day, but then also I think just, he has the confidence in himself to, that I think teams like, but it's also not anything that's just, too crazy and doesn't, at least from what I've been hearing, it wasn't like he was blowing anybody off, blowing interviews off or doing stuff like Shador Sanders was last year that may have that in part, I don't think completely that in part, led to his draft stock completely just going completely down the toilet all the way to the 5th round. Whereas granted, if you're asking me, like at least with Sanders, I think he was going to go somewhere there. Maybe he could have gone a little bit higher, but he got drafted there for a reason. And it's like, because if you're good enough, the NFL is going to look the other way on a lot of things. Like you have to do something really bad for them actually to take action against you, because that's just how they've always been. And it's like they want the best product. And how do you do that? You have the best players. But you know what? Some of those players are gonna come with some baggage. But if you're good enough, they'll look the other way as long as they can. But if you're not good, it's like, okay, is this gonna be, a distraction for us? So, but I don't think that's the case with Makai Lemon. Obviously, he's got the Bolitnikov to back up everything he accomplished in college. And then also just everything he did. And then just obviously how he's looked both at the combine and at pro day, and just everything he's done, I think has just been, I've always, thought he's, always been a really, class act, hasn't, I haven't heard of any stories. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't heard of anything of him, getting in trouble at all while he was at USC. So always, a guy who just did everything right, did everything by the book. So really just, I think what happened at pro day or at the combine doesn't worry me at all for in terms of his draft stock.
Yeah, I think the only time I can recall him even getting into any semblance of trouble was, when Lincoln Riley kind of held him and Jacoby Lane out for, was it the first quarter or the first half of that UCLA game?
One of
Um,
those two, I can't
yeah,
remember.
that was a little odd. We never really got an explanation for that one, but it didn't blow up into anything further, kind of beyond that. I think, in terms of talking about prospects and kind of their, I guess, sort of them being treated unfairly, or not even unfairly, but being treated disproportionately, I guess, because of their personality versus like their actual talent. I feel like you said, in most sports, that's not a problem, and at most positions in the NFL, it's not a problem. I think in the Shadur Sanders situation, it is like kind of uniquely a problem for quarterbacks. Like I think I can think of several examples, and again, Shadur Sanders is by no means like a generational talent or anything like that. Like what should Shadur Sanders have been like in the conversation at all for being a first round pick? Absolutely not. Like him slipping out of the first few rounds definitely felt like people, the some of the like more delusional media members who thought that he was, an incredible quarterback talent, like kind of getting it stuck to them. I was like, oh, finally, like, you know, some of these people who are going off of name value alone and have never actually watched a game and like, don't really pay super close attention to the Colorado football program are like seeing the truth. And, that Shadur Sanders is like a solid college quarterback, but he's not, by any means a first round quarterback talent. But anyway, I think there are like Shadur Sanders isn't. I do think him falling to the fifth round was maybe a little excessive. I expected him to go in maybe like the third or fourth. And also like him getting drafted after Dylan Gabriel was certainly really interesting, especially to the same team. That was really, really bizarre. Um,
Granted, obviously with how the season went, I can kind of see why the change was made. Even though got sick of Skip Bayless man crushing on him. Even though when we had Cody Kessler on here, which great interview y'all should check out, Cody did say that Skip does come more prepared. I did remember him asking about that, so I'll give Skip some credit there. But anyways, I was kind of more high on Gabriel at least heading into it, in part because of just what I saw. But sorry to interrupt.
no, yeah, no worries. I think the yeah, I think that there can be, because quarterbacks are like so in the spotlight, like in the NFL, you can kind of all the sports, you can kind of just like keep your personality and your personal life under the radar just because you're like under the helmet, like there's sort of a condition of anonymity in the NFL like there isn't in a lot of other sports. Like you hardly ever see the players out of their helmets, when they're on the field. And so like, but obviously that's not true for quarterbacks because they're, kind of the consistent interview, they're the absolute superstar. They're the player on every team that, the fan base is really following.
They're the face
Um,
of the team.
yeah, day in and day out. Other than the head coach, they do the most media interviews and all that kind of stuff. Like, and I feel like too, like because there is less kind of ability to connect in football, like the people that you can connect with matter even more. And so I think, like I said, there can just be like a disproportionate amount of care from NFL teams about like their quarterback and like how the quarterback represents the team, and like that can lead some teams away from some guys who, again, if like it's like you said, if you're a superstar it doesn't matter, but there are some guys who are definitely like decent quarterbacks who have been, I feel overlooked by teams just because they, present more of a distraction. And I think that there's also some like quarterbacks that are not great, but because they're incredible locker room guys, they, kind of continue to get jobs and get jobs and get jobs. Um, the examples that I can think of, and I think it's because I grew up, watching football in like the early to mid 2010s, like for very, very different reasons, obviously. Um, I felt that like the way that Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick were sort of treated like, again, Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick, not the two most talented quarterbacks you've ever seen play football in your life, but also like the only real chance Tim Tebow ever got to play quarterback for a team, he like led the Broncos to the playoffs. And then like, a couple of years later, he's like out of the NFL. Like,
Well, the year after they
it's,
bring in Peyton Manning.
yeah, I mean, the Broncos, getting Peyton Manning over him, obvious choice. But just like kind of sending him to purgatory on the Jets, and then the Jets like trying to play him at the same time as Mark Sanchez and like make him like a tight end quarterback, and then like ruined his career, and then he just never got a chance again after that.
Then he only got that one chance with Jacksonville because of Urban Meyer.
Urban Meyer, exactly. And he like got a chance with like a couple of like training camp chances, and like in all of his training camp opportunities played well, but just never. And again, Tim Tebow's not, the most talented quarterback, but I do think that the amount of media attention that would have followed him around definitely factored in. Colin Kaepernick, same thing. Like as soon as he knelt for the national anthem, it was like, okay, like this brings an extra kind of weightiness to any team giving him a chance. Like again, is Colin Kaepernick an incredible quarterback? No. Did he make a Super Bowl and an NFC Championship game in back-to-back years? Yes. So, and he did have a lot of that natural talent, like a rocket for an arm, very speedy, running quarterback. So like, should his career have just like ended immediately after he left the Niners like it did? I'm not sure it should have. And then Shedeur Sanders kind of falls into that same category, in my opinion. So I don't know. I think Mekhi Lemon like avoids that potential issue because again, he's a receiver. So he's not like, doesn't have, I mean, receivers do have the spotlight on them, but I feel like, you've seen receivers get in trouble and kind of come back and not really have like too many issues with like getting second and third chances from NFL teams. So I feel like it's not as big of an issue there, which is why I don't anticipate, again, not that Mekhi Lemon is some big distraction. Like we're talking about like people just like being rubbed a little bit of the wrong way by combine interviews. Like there's been countless NFL players that's happened, with, but anyways, I think that it's an interesting phenomena to observe for sure in terms of like the difference between quarterbacks and other positions.
Well, obviously receivers, you talk about them, there's obviously more than one on the field at one time. Quarterback, there's only one. And I'd argue there is no position like quarterback in all of sports.
Yeah.
And I say that because the spotlight's always on you. You're the most recognizable player, the face of your team, until suddenly you're benched. And it's not like all the other positions where it's like, guys are rotating, like the running backs or receivers, even like the offensive line. Like, you know what? Even once in a while, they do rotate those guys through. Quarterback, you're always on the field unless it's a blowout, and then your backup's in. But it's like, but if you get benched, everybody knows about it.
Yep.
And it's like, and if you're the second stringer, you're holding the clipboard and that's pretty much all. And then you're just, but then you're the most liked guy on the team. I grew up a Chargers fan, so I saw all those years with Phillip Rivers. And what was the one thing? I think I can name exactly one of the backup quarterbacks they had when Rivers was with the Chargers before they drafted Herbert. Robert Griffin III. And that was only because of just RG3 had already had a very prolific career just in terms of the teams he'd been with, all the injuries he'd sustained, and the fact that he actually got that shot to even just get to back up Rivers. And just because I knew who he was why it caught my eye. And this was obviously right around the time I think they moved to LA. So the LA Times has been covering them more heavily too. So I think for all those reasons, but that backup, it's like I just never knew who he was because Phillip Rivers always generally played pretty well and never got hurt. So for that reason, he was always the face. But there, countless times of, quarterbacks getting their shot, blowing it, getting benched, and that's kind of the last we hear of them. So really interesting, to follow it just with like how it can happen. I mean, even you look at just even a couple of years ago at USC with Miller Moss, like he had to wait really patiently for his chance. Obviously, everyone knew him. Maybe one of the most liked guys by the fan base. Obviously, I'm sure you remember all the Miller time chants that would happen every time he went in at the end of a blowout. But obviously, once he couldn't obviously hold up with all the pressure that came with being a starter, especially in the Big Ten, and then ultimately got benched in favor of Jaden Mayava. And to get a second chance to play, he had to leave the program he dreamed of playing for and grew up a fan of.
Yeah. I think also another interesting phenomena to observe is like somewhat edgy personalities are like generally like almost encouraged at other positions, like relative to quarterback. Like I was just thinking about Cam Scadaboo. Like Cam Scadaboo is like an absolute animal. And if your quarterback started acting like that, you might be a little concerned. um, but because he's a running back who just like runs people over, it's totally encouraged and fine. And I feel like again, like wide receivers, like are known for having big personalities. Like they're known for being like, very self-confident, talking a lot of trash, always demanding the football. So I don't think, Mekhi Levin having a little bit of like an edge to him at the combine is really going to be seen as much of a problem. Again, if it was like Jaden Mayava suddenly like acting like Cam
Could you imagine?
Ugh, I can't. Yeah, it's just the image in my head is so weird.
My favorite. My favorite one is always whenever there's a pick six, there's any sort of big turnover, the defense just makes a play, and as soon as it's over, they just all go boss up in the end zone. It's the most hilarious thing ever. Just like the cameras just have to get it on TV. It's hilarious, and I absolutely love that one. But yeah, that cannot happen to a quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. I just I can't imagine, like Jaden Mayava, like after a whole career of being like the quiet, reserved, like super humble guy, like all of a sudden like acting like Cam Scadaboo. Like that would be a cause for concern. I don't think people are too worried about Mekhi Lemon, but I mean, I guess we'll see. My question about his draft stock is, do you think it's possible that he lasts until the 13th pick and gets picked up by the Rams and gets to stay home?
I don't know. I mean, I'd obviously have to just kind of really evaluate who else would go ahead of him. I haven't really, fortunately, didn't really prep. I'd really have to, really evaluate everyone who's, in that draft and where they go to really answer. And I think it's something I'd need probably a bit more time, but I think it's certainly possible. I mean, to see him staying in LA, but I think he could also go anywhere. It just really just depends on kind of what kind of moves teams make ahead of the draft and what teams feel their receiver needs are, I think is really, I guess, the best answer I can make for that question. And where do the Rams fit into both of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most recent Mel Kiper mock draft I can find is from February 24th. And it looks like he had Mekhi Lemon going 8th to the Saints. So that would obviously, he wouldn't last that long there. Let's see. Let me see if I can find a more recent one. There's one here from NFL.com. Where does Mekhi Lemon go? This one actually does have Mekhi Lemon going 13th to the Rams. And that one's from Charles Davis. So, I mean, it seems like some of the analysts seem to think it's possible. Let's look at this CBS Sports one real quick. This one has the Rams passing on Mekhi Lemon and picking up Jordan Tyson instead, and Mekhi Lemon going 16th to the Jets. So it seems like people are, pretty clear that the Rams need a receiver, which, totally makes sense. But it's kind of will someone else pick up Mekhi Lemon before he gets to them? Will they decide to pick? Because, Jordan Tyson, also a very highly regarded prospect, kind of a superstar over there at Arizona State. So I guess we'll have to see, but it seems like it's definitely there's definitely a decent chance of that happening, which I'm sure, a lot of USC fans will be happy about. So it's something to monitor for sure.
And I think it'll be a great conversation point for us to have in the weeks to come leading up to the draft. Obviously, be sure to support the channel. Be sure to, cop your merch. Ethan, as always, repping the USC Voice of College Football camo cap. And that's going to do it for us here at the USC channel, or at the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. This has been USC Primetime Live, presented by FanDuel. And along with Ethan Inman, I am Crashlet Collier. Hope you have a great night. And of course, as always, fight on.